we are very focused on how, when we engage with our team, what are you really good at? That's the way I want to think and look at healthcare is instead of just fixating on what's broken, I actually want to dissect the problem and say, like, what's actually working in healthcare? What does healthcare do that really works? And how can they anchor on that even further than they are today?
The most engaged workers are those who do the work they really love, and the best leaders help them be in the position to do it. I'm your host, Tim Spiker, and this is the Be Worth Following podcast, a production of the People Forward Network. On this show, we talk with exceptional leaders, thinkers, and researchers about what actually drives effective leadership across the globe and over time. You just heard from Mona Veiseh, CEO of NuWest Healthcare at NuWest Group. For over 30 years, NuWest Group has worked in the staffing industry with specialized teams serving healthcare, science, finance and accounting, and technology. NuWest Group has been named to Inc. 5000's fastest growing companies list for the last 2 years while experiencing a 3-year growth rate of, and get this, 585%. Mona and her team contribute to that meteoric growth with the attitude of placing the very best healthcare workers in the very best healthcare placements. Mona's perspective on placing people where they can excel is not something she merely adopted as a professional. As a young girl, she saw her parents repeatedly make moves to put her and her brothers in situations where they could thrive. And that began with her parents' choice to move their entire family out of their home country of Iran, through a couple of other stops, and eventually to the United States. Her parents did this at great personal sacrifice. And that is where we begin.
I've got 2 big influences in my life, and it's absolutely my parents, particularly my dad, who, I was born in Iran in the middle of the Iran and Iraq war. We ended up, when I was about 5 years old, leaving the country right at the height of the conflict. At that time, my dad was a CFO of a shoe company, and through a bunch of contacts had gotten a new job in Cairo, Egypt, as the CEO of a manufacturing shoe company. And so from very, very young in my life, I started watching really how great businesses are run from underneath my dad's desk. I would go in and get to see how he walked into a company. One of the things that I'll never forget is every single time we'd walk into the manufacturing company in Cairo, Egypt, he would absolutely, the first thing he would do is walk the manufacturing floor and say hello to every single worker. And the last place he would go was his office. And so I've made that a big note within my environment here at NuWest. And while we're a virtual office, I still try and virtually touch every single member of the team, even though we aren't in this physical office with these confined walls, right?
What was it like to leave? And I realize you were 5, so you may not remember, but I'm imagining I am fleeing a war-torn country. And growing up here in the United States, I don't even have a category for that. Like, what was the literal process of that like for you and your family to get out of there and go to Egypt?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's all of the feelings. It's terrifying, exciting. It was very fast. We packed up. It's just the things you need, nothing more. We ended up doing that twice. That particular first time was really much rushed than the second time when we left Cairo. But yeah, you just take the essentials and, absolutely what you need. And you hug and kiss your family members and hope to see them again. But you really just, you don't know, And, when we were actually midair flying to Cairo is when they did the all clear and the conflict was resolved.
Wow.
So for us, it was a very unique experience where, there was a lot of feelings. We were excited, we were grateful, we were scared, all the feelings that go along with like leaving your home country and going to a brand new country where you don't know the language. and you're going to learn a lot. You're going to learn a lot.
Given the timing of that, was there any thought about, well, let's just go back?
There wasn't. For us, I mean, for my parents, the goal was to leave. They wanted the 3 of us kids, I've got 2 older brothers, to have the opportunity to study and have our education in more westernized countries. When you do that, that means you can work and live anywhere, and that was one of the gifts that they wanted to give to us. So they sacrificed really a lot of stability. The thought of staying was really nothing that ever crossed my parents' mind. They're grateful they made the leap. They're grateful they made the sacrifice to leave, and I'm really grateful to be able to talk to you, Tim, as a female CEO. That wouldn't have been a reality for me if I still lived in Iran.
Wow. Wow. What amazing perspective that you get to have and that we get to share with you in hearing your story. Now you mentioned leaving Egypt as another part of the story. So talk to us a little bit about the process of leaving Cairo and what that was like at what stage in your life and how that unfolded.
Yeah, so leaving Cairo was a little different, right? When we were in Cairo, it was very comfortable. My parents, they had a great experience there. It's very secure, safe. My dad had a great job. And there came to be a time though that my older 2 brothers were getting close to college education. And one of the things that my parents had always told us is you have to have a westernized education, therefore you can work and live anywhere. So they made the big leap of leaving Cairo and on a journey to find which Western country we end up in. So, we went to Istanbul for a little while. We actually lived in Canada for a bit, eventually found our way to Seattle. And so, for the second time in my life, I watched my parents really uproot everything they know and move into a brand new culture, a brand new country where they don't know the language again. One of the really formative pieces of my professional career is actually watching what my parents did in that environment. So again, I want to remind you, my dad was CEO of a shoe company. My parents lived a very comfortable life. And when they came to the United States, I watched them put that all aside. And my mom got a job at a laundromat. And my dad, his education didn't transfer because, again, he didn't have Western education. And so he worked as a manufacturer on a manufacturing line in Woodinville, Washington. The formative part of this whole thing, Tim, is every single day, my parents woke up excited and happy to go do the work that they were going to go do. So I never saw them complain. They never said, woe is me. Oh, this is hard. They said, life gives you a lot of challenges and it just depends on what you do with those challenges. And every single time you do something hard, you just get stronger. And so this was their next hard thing to do. They rebuilt their wealth and, they got to buy a business in Seattle and sell it. And I got to see them go through that hardship and that challenge, but come out better, stronger people because of it. And that's one of the very, very foundational pieces of how I try and run our team here is we're going to do hard things, but because of it, we will be stronger.
Wow. What an incredible example of humility and sacrifice and care for others and willingness to do hard things in order to create opportunities for others. What an incredible example of that. Talk to us a little bit about, I'm going to go back to something you said a little bit earlier around walking around. You're talking about kind of watching your dad walk the floor. First thing he did wasn't to go to the office and shut the door, and how easy it is for us to get in those kinds of, I don't know if I want to call it a rut, but we know what's sitting on the computer for us. And yet, as you said, sitting under the desk and paying attention to that. But now here we are. You're in a virtual work environment. And so talk to us a little bit about, from a very practical standpoint, what does walking around and visiting with people, how does that work? What does that look like at NuWest in a virtual world where you're not actually moving your feet to visit with people?
I mean, it's something that I think every company's figured out what works for them. now that they're, really virtually more oriented than they were before. What has ended up working for us is we have these Teams channels that are, you think of them as kind of department units. And these team channels are, how you might just over your cube wall, like shout out something. And so all of the leaders on our team, and me included, every single morning, I hop on and I try and just engage with the team in this virtual environment within their department, just like I would be walking around if they were all in an office together. Might leave a quote, a thought. I might just say hello. I might ask a question. We might share some news, but we try and do that every single morning and afternoon, just like you would if you were going to walk through the office in a physical environment. And before you leave at the end of your day, you walk around and see if there's that lone worker working in the corner, you're going to stop by and check in on them and see how things are going.
Was it pretty natural for you to engage with people? And the reason I'm asking this question is I think there are a lot of people who have a sense for what you just said. It's the end of the day. There's one person left. Let me go over and check in and say hi. And then there's the other chance interactions that happen literally in the hallway or literally by the water cooler, as it were. And so, as you bring that type of mentality into a virtual environment, it takes a lot more intentionality. It's not like you were going to get a drink of water and you bumped into somebody. And so, as you go to kind of extend that type of relational connection through virtual space, did it ever feel awkward or like, what's that process been for you?
It was really natural for us. We didn't have much tension to break through. Some of it was just as a necessary evil. We did really hard work. This team did amazingly difficult work together, particularly during COVID, that we had to communicate. We had to find really fast, meaningful ways to engage our team, build relationships, integrate new team members, and frankly, get good work done. So there really wasn't any tension. I think because the leadership just so quickly adapted to this environment, as we integrated new team members, it was just like, this is the way. And we didn't have the tension of like, oh, well, in the office, we used to do this. And that was actually one of the most surprising things for me. I expected more in the office, we would have done it this way. It took us a little bit to figure out how to use the whiteboard and those sort of things, but outside of that, I mean, it's been a pretty smooth transition for us.
So, would it be fair to say that New West is, would you characterize yourself as a company that did this virtual pivot during COVID and is going to continue to stick with it afterwards? We've heard that story over and over again. Is that true for you guys? How that panned out?
I believe so. I believe so. I'm very rare to make like finite statements, but for now in this environment with the workforce that we have that's really dispersed between New York and Hawaii, it makes a lot of sense. And we're getting great engagement scores and great results being remote. So there's really no need to pull people back inside.
I want to go back just a little bit further because there's a part of your story before New West where you were entertaining joining a much larger organization that had to do with the government. And I think that's a really, as we get a chance for people to get to know you a little bit, to kind of hear how you came to the US and that story. But then there's another part of this. You didn't end up going that route, but there was a time when you were. So I wonder if you'd talk about that just a little bit. It's fascinating to me. And so I'd love for folks to hear a little bit about that season.
Yeah. So, I grew up in Iran, moved to Cairo. I got to see a lot of different environments and cultures and the way countries are run. And so I've always been really fascinated by it. So I went to University of Washington. I'm a proud UW Husky, and I majored in international studies and poli sci. And really, because I had this big passion about, how the world comes together and how the e-commerce comes together. It's very interesting and how political rules and regulations really drive commerce as well. And so Coming out of college, I was going to either be a journalist or work for Homeland Security. And I speak fluent Farsi, and um, this was shortly after 9/11, so I was a very attractive candidate. I fell into New West through a friend of a friend who said, "Hey, while you're trying to do that, consider this opportunity. The interview process is pretty lengthy and there's a rigorous screening process that goes along." And so, I took this position at a small company. It was very, very small. It was maybe total of 9 people big. The healthcare department was 4 people big. And I fell in love with entrepreneurship. That's really what I fell in love with. And, one of the things I figured out early on in my life is everyone's got hobbies. My hobby is business. I love thinking about how businesses run, thinking about ecosystems, how to set up businesses for success. And yeah, and the healthcare ecosystem is really near and dear to my heart because, I used the healthcare system in Iran, used it in Egypt, and my whole upbringing, everything, the best of the best is in the United States. The very, very best is in the United States. And so coming to the United States and seeing that we don't have the best healthcare ecosystem is just it's crazy to me. So I'm really excited to help be a fix to that problem.
For those that are listening, that they may work in completely different industries and not touch the healthcare system except for when they use it once in a while. Share with us a little bit about, you have this varied background, just as you were describing. And so talk about the ecosystem of healthcare and what you see there as the pluses, as the challenges, as the opportunities. You're in that space all day, every day. So share with us a little bit how you see that.
Gosh, it's such a big question these days. What's working, what's not working? And Tim, one of the things, and you know us, and we're a strength-based organization, so we are very focused on how, when we engage with our team or talent externally, what are you really good at? And let's anchor on that the thing that you are really, really, really good at. That's the way I want to think and look at healthcare is instead of just fixating on what's broken, I actually want to dissect the problem and say, like, what's actually working in healthcare? What does healthcare do that really works? And how can they anchor on that even further than they are today? The workforce challenges. Um, I've been in the business for 18 years. I've been looking at this problem for 18 years. There are lots of reasons why it's continually getting harder and harder to get the right skilled workforce for the healthcare ecosystem. And I think part of that solve is going to be really anchoring on this component of getting the right people who really love doing the right kind of work in the right pieces of the healthcare ecosystem. In healthcare, it's one of the only industries where you have to have certain certification levels to do certain levels of work. And you can't grow into it. Like I grew into my role here at NuWest, right? I started in the compliance role and moved into the recruiting role and the sales role, and then eventually into management and leadership and climbed the ranks that way. In healthcare, you have a very finite way to grow your skill set. And so I think reimagining that, finding better ways to grow the workers into a career ladder within the health systems is a very, very critical part of the success of the overall ecosystem.
And that ability to grow into it, would you say that that's something that the healthcare ecosystem currently sounds like you're saying that there's a lack of that currently? Talk about that a little bit more for those that might be, not familiar with the industry from the inside.
So there's certified nursing assistants, and then there's licensed practical nurses, and then there's registered nurses, and then there's advanced practitioners, and then there's, doctors. And the ecosystem kind of is built in this way. To move out of those categories, you have to go back to school. So you have to go back to school, get further education, and get further certification in order to do that. When nurses are released into the healthcare ecosystem, they're almost always given a residency program in an inpatient hospital setting. The world of nursing, though, is much bigger than that. It's huge, right? So there's different kinds of nursing that is done within each of the pieces of the whole ecosystem. And so, what I'm passionate about is giving each healthcare worker an opportunity to start to get to experience, particularly for nurses, the whole ecosystem before, deciding, for example, that they want to be an inpatient or outpatient, or they want to be in urgent care, or they want to work within peds. And there's a very rigorous process right now to get into one specialty or the other. But are there fellowships? Are there shadowing work can we do? Is there virtual sessions that you can start to experience different methodologies or different disciplines within the healthcare ecosystem? So then you can decide for you that you're in your power seat and you're in your super seat.
Is it fair to say that that's something that doctors have had through their education? Because, and I didn't go to med school, but my understanding from talking with many others is that they essentially have a chance to kind of taste and find out and let me see before they really zero in. Is this essentially, how do we create the equivalent of that or something similar to it for nurses in comparison to some of those opportunities that doctors have had through their schooling?
There is a residency program and you can do clinical rotations for nurses, but I think that when you're looking at something really theoretical, it's harder than when you're actually in it. So I'll give you an example. I was a recruiter for a really long time. And, there's this one particular nurse who was fairly early in her career. She had gone to residency program for surgery. And so she was an OR nurse, a really, really, really good OR nurse. But every single day, when she'd come off her shift, I was her recruiter. She would call me and she was like, gosh, I'm done with this. It's pretty rigorous. When you're an OR nurse, you're doing a lot of different surgeries. It's high intensity work often. And so she was like, I think I'm burnt out and I think I got to get out of the nursing profession. And I said, hey, 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 hold up. This is just one specialty in this
Mm.
world of specialty. So let's talk about how you can use the skills that you have today, but maybe you can't be a peds nurse tomorrow, right? Because you don't have the skills to go do that. But how do you start to build the foundation to specialty that's right next to that? Right? And so maybe you try an outpatient surgery place instead of inpatient, and maybe that lower acuity starts to get it right for you, right? And so navigating this world is sometimes hard when you have to have to apply for these positions a very rigorous requirement in order to be accepted into the position.
Okay, so knowing how critical it is that you have qualified people in all these different spaces of healthcare, as you look to evolve the ecosystem to create more opportunities, how do you manage that? Because it's a real challenge. You can understand why anybody who's being treated wants an expert doctor and an expert nurse and an expert everybody, frankly. And yet, you're talking about creating entry points for people to understand and experience other sides to it. So, how do you manage the downsides of people with less experience? Obviously, you're trying to get them some varied experience so that they find their niche, but people obviously need the highest level of care. So, that almost feels like a contradiction. How do you manage that as the ecosystem evolves?
Well, we really believe that each nurse or each role should be used in their highest scope of practice. And when that happens, that delivers the best care to patients, right? So a nurse is really working within their scope, and, the CNAs are working within their scope. And together as a team, they're taking care of that patient. And that is making sure that that highest functioning resource on that unit is able to provide that highest functioning care for the patients that they see. A lot of this, and we've talked to a lot of healthcare workers over the last couple of years as the pandemic has gotten really strained resources and made it really, really hard. And what the nurses really want, they'd love more nurses on every unit, but they'd love to make sure that there was support. So there was enough CNAs doing the work that they do. They're a critical part of the ecosystem. They don't get enough limelight often. They're doing some of the hardest work that professionals do in a healthcare ecosystem. They're helping people get in and out of beds. They're making sure they're dressed, making sure they're fed. They're really holding patients' hands at times when they really need them. And so when the nurse says, I can't do it all, it's because that they really can't. And they need everyone in the ecosystem doing their part so that they can do their best work. And I think that goes for doctors as well. Doctors are even more stretched than nurses are. And so everybody coming together is a critical part of the whole ecosystem working.
Okay. So let's say that I was a nurse who, like, look, the high pressure of emergency surgery is maybe not something I want to keep doing, but you're like, yeah, but what about outpatient? What if it was I want to see about that, but I don't yet have the experience to be fully there. Maybe kind of reverse it and say, okay, how do you solve for that problem to get people experience even as people need the highest levels of care?
Yeah, so I think that's some of the things that are really hard in nursing, right? You can't skip, you can't jump or leap all the way there, right? But you can start to build a career path that eventually gets you there. The biggest and most important part, you have to understand your end goal. Just like, Tim, if you wanted to be a CFO tomorrow, like you couldn't just jump, skip, be a CFO, right?
Right?
But
True.
you could take the incremental steps in order to get there, build the experiences that you needed to get there. So that's part of what we do as an agency is we help those nurses. We have a clinical review team and a clinical team that's available to our staff. So if they have questions, concerns, if they want to talk about their career and things that they love, things that they struggle with, we really at NuWest believe that people doing work that they really love is them in their superpower seat. And for nurses and for healthcare workers, we're passionate about helping them map out their careers in more thoughtful, sophisticated ways than maybe they have resources to do today.
It's insane that I'm hearing some of the perspective of New West around being a relationship driven organization, which is to say, I think about typical placement, not necessarily in healthcare, but anywhere where so many agencies just look at it as a numbers game and we're going to interview this many people and we'll get them into this many interviews and it's just math, really. And so what I hear you saying is we want to walk alongside people. We want to have a relationship with them. If they feel like they wanted to bump up a level in acuity, then we want to talk with them about that and have some measure of support for them to help you get there. When I think of a relationship talent agency, relationship placement, am I hearing that correctly in terms of how New West looks at it?
Yeah, I mean, if they wanted to bump up, we would help them map that out of how would you intentionally do that? You can't just do that tomorrow, right? So what certifications, what kind of experience do you need? Do you go to a critical access hospital that's going to give you a little more wide rank experience, right? Versus like a hospital institution where you're going to get very specialized and you're going to work in this one specialized unit and you're going to learn everything you can about this one thing, right? So there's lots of ways to get there. What you can't do is just jump, right? You can't jump from one to another. Like that is not safe, and patient safety is our number one concern. But what you can do is say, like, okay, how do I just get the next type of experience that I want? And then how do I build that really intentional career path to a destination, to a North Star? One of the things that my parents gave to me really early in life is, you only get one life, but you're the driver. There's no one else driving this except for you. No one's going to know what you want. You are the only person that can really understand what you want and what you want out of the values that are really important to you. And so figuring that out and having that North Star as your first and most important step in your career, and then you build a plan backwards and create that step-by-step plan to get you there.
Well, I can see where New West would have the opportunity essentially through that mentality to have a long-term relationship with people that they have placed as you stay in contact. My perception of placement as a whole is that that's pretty unique. and it also sounds very wise. So I think fitting into that relationship-oriented strategy that you're working towards, I wouldn't have thought of it that way, but it all makes sense as you unpack there, literally walking with people throughout their career.
Yeah. Tim, I tell people we're talent agents more than anything else. We're helping talent understand their strengths and then helping them get into the right place to perform those strengths. And each one of those folks have a goal of priority that they're trying to enrich in their lives. And we're part of that story, right? For healthcare ecosystems, we're really workforce solutions. So we're thinking of how do we build the right workforce for this company, for this team? And every healthcare system out there is unique. There's, some that might look like each other, but they're really unique to themselves. The culture they run, the type of services, the units they have. And so it really is this very big matching exercise that's really fun. And I know our team loves doing this matchmaking on the back end.
As we begin to kind of wrap up our conversation, we talked a lot about the ecosystem of healthcare and how do people kind of step up their opportunities or right size depending on like what are they looking for, what fits with you. Talk a little bit about how you lead the organization. And there's the function of what the organization is doing, which is essentially what we've been talking about. But as a CEO, what are the most critical things you think about day in and day out as you're leading this now virtual workforce that's helping people to find that sweet spot for themselves and for patients? What's top of the list for you as a leader?
It's probably two things, Tim. Number one, it's engagement and are we having fun? Here at NuWest, we think that when you're doing your best work, when you are in your flow, in your genius zone, when you're really, when you're doing some sort of work and you lose yourself in it because you're just enjoying it so much. We want to make sure that everyone has that experience at NuWest, where they're doing the work that they love so much that they forget the time. So that's something I think about, and that taps into engagement. How engaged is our workforce? And then the second thing is, are we growing great leaders? I've been really lucky in my life to have great mentors. I talked about my dad being one, and I want to make sure that we pay that forward. So we've got a leadership series here at NuWest that I love running, and it's anchored around building leaders that hopefully go out in the world to do even better things. Being part of rebuilding the healthcare systems is definitely something we're all passionate about. But if they leave that and do other great things, we're going to be super excited and cheer them on as they do those other great things as well.
So usually here, as we go to wrap up an episode, I have 2 or 3 things that I want to share with you, just as we look back on the comments and thoughts that we heard during the episode. But in this case, I really have one. And here's what it is. Did you notice how much focus Mona had on helping individuals end up in a place that's great for them? And when I say great, I mean 2 things. One, it's a place where they are very capable, highest and best use of their time, energy, and talent. But the other side of great here is ending up with somebody doing something that they love. Now, let me lean into common sense for just a second. What do you think gets produced when somebody is working in an extreme area of strength that is also an extreme area of interest? Can we just go ahead and say that that's going to produce an exceptional result? If we combine somebody's ability with their love, somebody's capability with their interests, that produces a better long-term result every time. And so the question that I want to leave you with today is this. What are you doing as a leader to proactively help your people be in positions that leverage their greatest strengths and lean into their greatest interests? This is Tim Spiker reminding you to be worth following. and to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. If you've heard something valuable today, please share our podcast with your friends and colleagues. And if you're up for it, leave us a 5-star review. Thanks for listening.